Hi, in this video I will talk about unit testing and also will give some examples of how you can create unit tests in Visual Studio. So here you see the contents of this video. First I will give a short introduction to testing and then explain what unit testing is, and then finally I will give some test examples using Visual Studio to create unit tests. I start by give a short introduction to testing in general. Here you see the software development lifecycle we ordinarily use when creating software. So we have these different phases: planning, requirements analysis, design, implementation, and then we have this important testing phase before we start deployment and install the software within the customer environment. So finding bugs is very important, and it's important that you find bugs as early as possible in the software development life cycle. So here you see how much it costs to fix the bugs when you find bugs in one of the phases in the life cycle. So if you find bugs in the requirements or design phase here, it's much easier to fix the bugs, and it's much cheaper than if you find the bugs when you have installed the software within the customer environment. We can define or divide testing into two groups. We have validation testing, which is to demonstrate to the developer and the customer that the software meets its requirements. And then we have two types of software. We have customer software, custom software. So then in this case there should be at least one case for every requirement in the software requirements specification document. For more generic software, there should be tests for all of the system features that will be included in the product release. While the other category is defect testing. We need to find inputs and input sequences where the behavior of the software is incorrect or does not conform to its specification. So these are caused by defects, bugs in the software, and unit testing goes into this category. We also have some other test categories. We typically divide into what we call black box testing. In this case, you need to know. So in this case, you don't need any knowledge of how the system is created. So typically, this kind of testing is done by a tester that doesn't know the program in detail. While in white box testing, you need to know or need to have knowledge of how the system is built in detail, both in design and in implementation. So this is typically done by the developer. We can also divide testing into different levels. So in the bottom we have this unit testing. So in this case we test a module, a program, or an object or a class, and we test that part independently of the rest of the system. While the next level is integration testing. Then we test the interface between the different components and how these components interface or interact with other components or systems. Then next level of testing is system testing, and then we test the behavior of the whole product or the whole system as a total package. And then finally we have something called acceptance testing. This is typically in cooperation with the customer, and the goal is to be sure that the software works as expected and fulfill the requirements that the customer has to the product. So unit testing is about testing each piece independently and isolated. And then integration testing, the next level, is to make sure the different pieces work together and to test the interfaces between the different pieces. And then we need to test the whole system as a whole system, and this is called system testing. We also have something called regression testing, and that is to test your code and to check if your code or your program still works after you have changed some parts of the code. So every time you change your code, you should perform some regression testing. So that's why we use a tool like Visual Studio. So in Visual Studio we typically create the unit tests, and every time we change our code we rerun the unit testing tests and make sure the code also works after you have made some changes inside the code. So let's summarize. We have these different levels of testing. We always start creating the unit tests, and typically unit tests are written by the developers as part of the programming, and each part of the code needs to be tested separately to make sure each piece in the code works as expected. So this is unit testing. You can either test this manually, or you can use a tool like Visual Studio to make this an automatically part of the programming. And then we have regression testing. So every time you make changes in your code, you should run all the units test to make sure these pass, and that they don't get any error in the unit tests. And then next level is the integration testing, which means you need to put the different pieces together and test the interaction and the interfaces between the different pieces. Then finally you have this system or validation testing, and that you, in this case, you test the whole system and make sure the whole system works as expected. And you typically test the system against its requirements in the requirements specification document. Then finally, when the development team think they are finished with the system, they need to perform an acceptance testing together with the customer to make sure. So the customer needs to make sure that the software meets all the requirements they had in the beginning. And then if the software passed the acceptance testing, the software can be installed in the customer environment and they can start using it. Next, I will give an introduction to unit testing. So what are unit testing? So unit testing, or also someone like to call it component testing, refers to tests that verify the functionality of a specific section of code, usually at the function level. In object-oriented programming, this is usually a class or a method. And unit tests are typically written by the developers as part of the programming. So you can typically create the unit test within your programming environment. Later we will learn how to create unit test within Visual Studio. And also Visual Studio and Team Foundation Server, or Visual Studio Online, or Visual Studio Team Services, has built-in functionality for creating and automatically execute unit tests. You also have a concept called the test-driven development. In this case, coding and testing are done in parallel, And the tests are normally written before you start writing the code. And this concept was introduced as part of the extreme programming, which is an agile method. So, but you have to remember, unit tests are important part of software development today. Either you are using test-driven development or other programming processes. Today there exists lots of unit test framework you can use, depending on what kind of programming language you use and programming environment. In this video we will focus on Visual Studio, and in Visual Studio we have built-in support for unit testing. So we will use this built-in unit test framework. But you have, if you want to use Java, you have something called JUnit. If you use PHP, you have PHP unit. If you use LabVIEW, you can use the LabVIEW unit test framework toolkit, etc. So the basic concept in unit testing is to compare the results when running the methods with some input data, which we call the actual value, with some known results, which we could call expected. So every unit test framework has this method, as we call assert, and this R-equal method, which we use, and then we can compare the expected value with the actual value, and if they are not equal, the unit test will not pass, and you will show an error message, which you can write here in this case. Next, I will introduce unit testing in Visual Studio. So unit testing in Visual Studio. In Visual Studio, we have built-in features for unit testing. So we need to include a so-called test project in our solution. And when we are writing test methods, we have these requirements. So all the test methods need to be decorated with the test method attribute. The method must return void value, and the method cannot have any input parameters. So these are the requirements for creating test methods inside Visual Studio and also in other unit tests frameworks. So let's start with an example where we create an application and a belonging unit test project from scratch using Visual Studio. Here we will create this simple example. Here we see an example of the user interface where we have a text box where you can enter the value in degrees Celsius, and then we can click this button in order to convert the value from Celsius to Fahrenheit, like this. So we will create this user interface within Visual Studio, and we will create the code that converts the value from Celsius to Fahrenheit, and then we will use this known formula that converts the value from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So we'll start creating our graphical user interface. In this case, we will just use an ordinary WinForm application. So we select new project and select the Windows Form application template, and then we start creating our graphical user interface. So let's create this application within Visual Studio. So now I have opened Visual Studio, and let's start creating a new project. And we select C# Windows and Windows Form application. So we select the Windows Form application, and we select a proper name and a proper location and click OK. Next, we start creating our graphical user interface with the different text boxes. So 2 text boxes and a button. and then we can add labels, etc. So now I created my graphical user interface. I have two text text boxes and a button. I used two labels, and I have changed the name on the text boxes like this: text Celsius, this is text Fahrenheit, etc. Like this. And then we have this button, which I have called button convert, like this. Next, we need to add a class. So we need to add a new class where we create our code. So in this case, we create a new class, and then we create the Celsius to Fahrenheit method, which we use to convert the temperature from Celsius to Fahrenheit using this formula. So here you see the class we shall create, and then this method we are going to create, which convert from Celsius to Fahrenheit. So let's create this class and this method within Visual Studio. So we create a new class within our project, add new item, and then we select class, and then we need to enter a proper name. I can call it temperature convert, like this. Click OK, add, and then we can start enter the code within our class. So now I have entered or written the Celsius to Fahrenheit method, which has temperature Celsius as an input, and return the temperature value within Fahrenheit. And here we have implemented the formula like this. I also set both the method and the class to be public, like this. So now we have created our graphical user interface, and we have created a class and a method that converts the temperature from Celsius to Fahrenheit. Next, we need to create our main code, which updates the user interface. So here you see the code we are going to create within our form. So this code just convert the temperature written in the text box called text Celsius into Fahrenheit using this class and method we just created. So let's create this code within Visual Studio. So we are back in Visual Studio. Here we have our graphical user interface, and then when we enter a value here and click the convert button, this value should be converted to Fahrenheit and be shown in this text box. So we can double click on this convert button in order to create the code within the button convert click event. So let's create the code here. I just copy it in from the PowerPoint like this. So here I have created some variables. Here I create an object of this class we just created, and here I convert the value within the text box to a double, and then here I use the Celsius to Fahrenheit method in order to convert the value from Celsius to Fahrenheit, and then finally I convert the value to a string and put it in the Fahrenheit text box in our user interface. So next, of course, we should test our application. So in this case, we could enter a value. In this case, I enter value 22, click the convert, and then the value is converted to Fahrenheit and shown in this text box. And we have used this formula to implement the conversion, and Let's try this example within Visual Studio. So I click the start button in order to run our program. Here we have our application. I enter the value 22, click convert, and we get 54 as the final results. As you can see, if you do this calculation manually, we will get this result. So our program actually calculates the wrong value. It calculates 54 while we should get 71.6. So here is something wrong. So let's create a unit test in order to figure out what's wrong within our code. So let's create a new unit test project within our solution in Visual Studio. So then we just click on the solution, click add a new project, and then we select test, and then we select the unit test project, and then we select a proper name. And then, as you will see, we will get two projects within our solution. We will get our application, and we will get a new project, which is our unit test project. Next thing we need to do in our test project is to add a reference to our application here. So we click on the references, right click, and add the references, and then we select the reference to our main project. So let's show how we can do this in Visual Studio. So we are back in Visual Studio. Here we have our application, and then we can right click here, add new project, and then we can select test and unit test project, and then we can enter a proper name. We can just call it unit test temperature or something, and then just click OK. And then you see here we have our main application, and here you have the project for our unit tests. And here under references, just right click and add the reference, and then under projects solutions, then we need to add a reference to our application, and then just click OK. You see here we get a reference to our application. So by default, in our unit test project, Visual Studio will create the following unit test class. And you see the class is has this attribute test class, and the method has this test method attribute. So now we can just use this as a starting point in order to create our test methods for our project. But it's a good idea to change the name of the class, the test class, and of course changing the name of the test methods. So here you see the test class and the test method we are going to create in this example. So here let's start with since we added the reference for our application, we need to also use the using to include it here. And then here we create an object of our temperature convert class, and then in this case we have the value we enter in our application, which was 22, and then by our calculations the value should be expected to be 71.6, like this. And then we use our convert method like this, and then finally we create the assert r equal, we use the assert r equal method, and then we compare the expected value which should be 71.6, and then we compare it to the calculated value from our conversion method. And then if these are not equal, this error will occur and the test will not pass. So let's create our test class and test method. So let's go to Visual Studio. So we are back in Visual Studio, and here we have this UniTestEn class, which was created automatically by Visual Studio. So you can just right click to change the name. So you can change it to UniTest temp convert or something, and just click yes here, and then we can enter our test method. So I just paste in the code from PowerPoint like this. So then here we have the code as I explained. You see we get this error message, so I just need to add using add this namespace like this, and then let's take the code one more time. Here I convert, here I create an object of our temperature class, and then here this is the value we are entering, and then this is the expected value, and then we use our Celsius to Fahrenheit method in order to convert from 22 in this case, and then this actual value is compared to the expected value, which should be 71.6, and if these are not equal, the unit test will not pass and give this error message. So let's start running our unit test. Then here under test in the menu we have Windows, and then the Test Explorer, and then here on the left we see the Test Explorer we are using in order to run the unit test. So then we can just click Run All, and then the tests are running, and then you see after a while you get these test results. So the test Fahrenheit gives an error, and here in this window we see a more detailed explanation of the results. So the test was failing, and as you see we expected value 71.6, with the test in this case gave 54. So this means our conversion method, inside our conversion method there are some error we need to fix. So then we need to start to debug in order to find the error in our code. So let's go back to our application and our class, temperature convert class, and so somewhere in this method the error is happening. So as you see in this formula, so you see in this formula we have made an error, because according to this formula we need to multiply TC with 9 and then divide the results with 5, but in this case 5 is first multiplied with TC, and then 9 is divided with this result, and then 32 is added. So we need to change our formula in order to fix the error. So let's change our code. Let's add so TC should be multiplied with 9, like this, and the result should be divided with 5, and then 32 should be added. So let's save our code and let's run the test one more. Just run all. You see, in this case the test was passing the criteria. So now we have a green mark here, which means the unit test passed in this case, and this means our code is hopefully correct. So this is how we create and execute unit test within Visual Studio. So basically you just add a new project, a test project, and then we add a reference to our application, and then we create one or more test methods in order to test and see if our code works as expected. Another thing we should also look into is what we call code coverage. So let's go to Analyze Code Coverage and select All Test. And then after a while we get the code coverage results in the bottom here, and we can click on this small arrow, and then we can find our application, our class, and our method. And then in this case we see that the code coverage in this case is 100%. So that's good, because a goal with making the unit test is to cover all parts of the code. In this case we have covered 100% of the code in this example. Typically if we use if sentences, if else sentences or similar, we typically need to create one unit test for each if else in the if else sentence. So always make sure you create unit test for your code, and also that you check the code coverage for your code to make sure the tests cover all parts of your code. So that's all. So good luck with your unit testing within Visual Studio.